cops have read it. What is the most what the fuck happened here moment you've experienced? Late to the party, but my favorite so far has got to be the tale of the UFO/aliens. I was a cop on the res for a while and had my fair share of crazes. One night, I'm out driving around and I get a call from dispatch. There's a UFO out in one of the farmers' fields. Okay, so I get to the house and talk with the guy. We know each other. He doesn't seem to be that loony. I turn my spotlight onto said field and sure as shit, there's something not quite right there. It's metal and sheet. So I go bebopping through the furrows and hoping my scardiness isn't showing because this is freaky. It was an autumn night with the wind howling and clouds blowing overhead. I get closer. I have one hand on my holstered gun and the other shining my flashlight. I was rehearsing what I was going to say to our new overlords and then my brain finally clicks as to what the fuck it actually was. A wad of those stupid Mylar balloons. All blown up and caught on some weds. I'm talking like 20 of those fakers, just chilling and scaring the shit out of me. I grabbed them and walked back out to the farmer. He started laughing and then I did too. I handed them over to him and got back in my squad, still shaking. The sad part was, he passes away a few years ago and his family gave me those deflated balloons that he had kept. I have them in my basement now. Eater, holy shit. I work overnights, so I apologize for getting back to everyone so late. I used to work as a cop on the Sisseton-Wahpeton Reservation in South Dakota. Loved every second of it, from playing stoop with the little kids, where we'd sit on the front steps of someone's house and eat snacks, to finding all the different loopholes to get someone help. I miss it, but it's not conducive to family life either. Thanks everyone for all the upvotes, awards, etc. Point 2. I'm taking a slightly different approach in answering this question. A couple of months ago, I got a K/questionable activity call. It's a catch-all for anything suspicious. The caller stated she believed someone had snuck into her backyard, climbed up onto her second floor deck, and then left an imprint of their dick on her sliding door. I show up to the call about 5 minutes later, and she's mad at me because I didn't schedule an appointment to come over, and her kids saw me. She didn't want her kids to think something bad had happened. After we get past her anger towards me for showing up, she shows me the glass sliding door in question. In all fairness to the caller, there was a sizable smudge and imprint on the glass. However, the imprint looked nothing like any business I've ever seen. In fact, the imprint looked really similar to the dead bird laying on the deck next to the door. When I pointed out the dead bird and explained my belief that no dick had been placed on her door, the caller became incredibly irate and told me she moved to our city because it was supposed to be very safe, but now she was thinking of moving away because naked people throwing dead birds at her house was more than she could handle. Realizing I would not be able to rationalize with dick bird, I left and wrote my report. Some people don't deserve to call 911 edit. Thanks for the silver edit too. Thanks for the gold. This is my uncle's story, not a cop, but the call was sent to the fire department instead due to the strangeness. The truck was sent on a call for an unknown disturbance, which basically means anything in the world. They get sent an address and that's pretty much it. Truck drives down the street looking for this address and they get to the end and all they can see is an abandoned lot with nothing but bushes. Even though they can't see anyone, they have to get out and investigate. So my uncle and a couple of the guys get out of the truck and start walking around with the usual fire department call out. They didn't hear anything for a while and were about to pack it in as another pointless prank call when my uncle walked past a bush and heard rustling. He looks over and sees a man standing kind of awkwardly behind a bush. "Hey Mr. Fireman, did you call 911? Uncle Yes sir." My uncle steps a bit closer and realizes how man is buckers naked and standing at a strange angle. He motions to another firefighter that he found the caller and goes behind the bush to begin assessing. He is a firefighter/paramedic. That's when he realizes that the man has what he refers to a faking bunny tail on his butt. Of course they try to get the man to explain why he had called in distress and what was going on. After a bit of avoidance, the man finally admits that he had taken a toilet brush cleaner and shoved the handle up his bum. Honestly, no idea why anyone would think this is a good idea generally. Being the enlightened individual that he is, he chose one with a hook on the end to hang up in a bathroom. What my uncle and the other firefighters assumed was that the hook had gotten stuck on something internally because they couldn't pull it out, and it caused the man significant discomfort when they tried. My uncle left the man with another firefighter, getting his information, and went back to the truck to call for an ambulance. Of course at this point he always mentions that he walked around the truck to see the rest of the company trying to silently die of laughter out of view of the bushes. When the ambulance arrives, my uncle meets them with a grin on his face and tells them to brace themselves before walking them over to the bushes. They assess the man and conclude that there is no way for them to remove the toilet brush in the field and that they have to admit him to the hospital for surgery. The only problem was that they couldn't figure out how to get him into the gurney without causing him to move in a way that caused him more pain. They end up throwing a blanket over him, and the firefighters help maneuver him into a sort of downward dog/mountain position with his bum in the air to keep the toilet brush at the right angle. At that point my uncle decided that the fire department was done with the call and the paramedics could handle it from there, and loaded up the company onto the truck. As they began to drive away he says they were loading this guy into the rig as we drove off, and the last I saw of him was that blanket falling off and that damn bunny tail of his sticking straight up in the air. My uncle did follow up on this call with a friend at the hospital. The brush was removed surgically due to the hook getting stuck on something internally and causing the man to have some serious health complications. He has way more stories due to being a working firefighter since he was 18 in Southern California, 62 today. This one happened to my friend. First day on the job. He's driving with his partner. Normally we don't have partners, but for the first 6 months, when you start you are paired up. Also, we have community volunteers which are like unarmed, but trained individuals who assist the peace officer. So 3 people total. He's driving down a highway when he sees a man on the side of the road near an entrance to an access road for a cottage. The man is naked and covered in blood and pointing down the access road, trying to get their attention. Turn on lights and go down road. The man is signaling them, and when they pull over he just leaps into a woods and starts running alongside the road. They follow. They get to a cottage and the door is open. They turn to look at the naked man and he's gone. Vanished into the woods. There is also visibly blood all over the door and deck. Supervisor gets out, goes into the trunk, gets the shotgun, and gives it to the unarmed auxiliary saying something like, "Cover out back, and try not to shoot us, we are going in." He and my friend draw their pistols, and go point. When they get inside there is blood everywhere. Like from a movie, all over the walls, furniture, just everywhere. Enter the living room. There is a man on the couch with a couple knife wounds to his stomach, but is alert, and seems actually not that bad, but he's holding a pit bull on a leash. "If you let the dog go it's dead," says supervisor. Guy ties leash to side of couch, puts his hands up, but won't say a word. "Is there anyone here? What happened? Are you okay?" Nothing. He's not answering. They place him under arrest and auxiliary takes him to the car. They continue searching upstairs, clearing rooms out until they get to one of the bedrooms. They look in and there is a guy under some covers, but still obviously awake. "Show me your hands." The guy hears them, throws the blanket off to reveal he is also naked, stabbed, and basically about to die from blood loss. Paramedics come, house is fully cleared out. As it turns out the 3 guys, including naked forest man, were all drug dealers just having a get together. They started doing ecstasy, and after getting really high it turned into a bit of a gay orgy. In a moment of lucidity one of the drug dealers realized he wasn't gay, and grabbed a knife, which escalated into a gay orgy knife fight, hence all the blood. That was day 1. I was a passerby during a public argument between 2 strangers. I passed by before the police rolled in. What I witnessed, a foreigner trying to fight with a Greek vendor. They started throwing each other around. People step in to separate them, but they won't let each other go. One guy loses his pants and underwear. The other guy is trying to swing at his balls. A young girl rushes in with a chair and breaks it against the head of one of the randoms who tried to separate them. An older grandma throws her shoes at the girl. The guy who got hit by a chair throws the shoes back at the grandma, who gets hit square on the face. The younger girl takes her shoe off and smacks his head again. While the grandma runs over pulling the girl's hair, the guy finally gets a grip on the other guy's business, while one other guy who is separating them is biting on his head trying to get him to let go. All the while a woman is screaming from the balcony above them, "You thief, stealing balls from children. Thief, I saw you. Give back the balls to the children." Yay. I don't know either man. Edit. Damn first ever award. I'd like to thank my mom, my dad, the wonderful silver giver, and of course the Greek vendor and but naked guy for making all this possible. Not a cop, but have a story. So a couple of years ago, I was in a fender bender. I'm driving down our small town main road, late at night, on the way home. Small town, so to keep noise down at night, all the traffic lights along the main road are set to green as default and red to the sides, so that big trucks don't have to stop and use their noisy brakes. I'm tired after a long drive, so I'm cruising at speed limit, green lights all the way for me. When out of nowhere a car suddenly comes screaming into the intersection ahead of me, leaving me with no time to even react. I T-boned them at an angle as they are entering the main road at quite a speed and ricochet off. My car spins around twice on the slightly damp road before coming to a stop without hitting anything else. The other car doesn't even slow down and keeps driving on, leaving me sitting there feeling like I'm that random innocent car that always gets wrecked in a movie when the villain makes his escape. Skip ahead until the authorities arrive. Cop gets out of his car, sees only my car that's almost wrecked, and absolutely no damage to anything anywhere else. He looks me up and down, sees blood rushing down my face from a head gash from destroying my rearview mirror, and goes, "What the fuck happened? What the hell did you hit?" Some questioning later, while the medics are putting a bandage around my head, the other car arrives, with only minor damage. The cop must have seen the relief on my face as the other driver walked over and explained that his wife was going into labor and he had to get her to the hospital. While we were busy at the scene, she gave birth to a beautiful healthy baby girl with no complications. He then left quickly to come and explain, and he even showed us pictures of his newborn on his phone. I didn't press charges and his insurance paid for fixing my car and my medical bills. The what the fuck on that cop's face was epic though. Edit. Didn't think it would be necessary, but some clarification. This was in South Africa. They didn't have medical, so calling an ambulance would cost them a small fortune. The guy said he saw me getting out and waving my arms around after the accident, so he knew I was okay. Apparently they also didn't think it was a bad crash, since they were still driving. Yes, he was an idiot, but he had his family to think of. I would probably have done the same thing. And the hospital was literally 2 blocks away anyway. Yes, he made a mistake, but me pressing charges after an honest accident like that would only wreck this new family. Besides, no one got seriously injured, and his insurance covered all the damages, so no harm done in the end. Not a cop, but I was there in the aftermath, and years later when the rest of the story came out. When I was in my first year of college, my girlfriend had a roommate who was dating a highway patrolman. One night we were laid up watching TV at her place when he came up in the patrol car. He never did this. The car went to his home and stayed, came in and fell on the couch mumbling 199. Just 199 over and over. After a while, he got over the shakes and told us what happened. He was sitting on a stretch of the highway nicknamed Snakeback as it had lots of hills on this 20-mile straightaway. They would sit in the bottom of the hills and catch speeders as you couldn't see the car until you topped the hill right before it, pop speeders with radar, and wait on the next one. Well, he's sitting there and the radar goes off 199. This is the top reading his radar unit can show. He looks around, clears the reading, and lays it back on the dash. 199. What the fuck? Picks up the gun, aims it down the road. 199. He's about to start the diagnostic test because there has got to be something wrong with the unit. Rah, whole damn car shakes, trees are moving, and he about sheets himself. All he saw was a blue streak. He didn't call it in or anything. What would I say? Hey, there's a blue streak coming your way at 200 miles per hour. He just came to us as we were the closest people he knew. After about an hour and a smoke, he went back to finish his shift. 2.5 years later, I'm with a friend who is a pilot at the local airport. One of his buddies went to tell his favorite story. He was flying back from a trip in his Cessna a while back and saw a cop sitting on the highway in the same spot he had gotten the ticket and decided to divabum his ass. He took his blue Cessna balls to the wall divabum style right at him, laughing his ass all the way to the airport. Point was this about 2.5 years ago. Yeah, how'd you guess that? When I told him the first part of the story he doubled over laughing. So we wanted to talk to this guy who had a history of child sex offenses and had been reported approaching kids in the town center. He was living out of a van which had been in the same spot for a couple months. I'd never seen the van myself, it was just known by others that it was there. 2 others went to where he was approaching kids and 2 of us went to see if he was in his van. It was an old, rusty beaten up pose with windows on the sides and back. Note that this guy definitely lived alone. Front windscreen, bottom half blocked with beer cans, top half blocked with women's underwear draped across the top. Point side window, smashed, but smashed outwards. Other side and rear window, smeared with honey on the inside. Based on the empty honey jars we could see. Point inside, floors completely covered in women's clothing and underwear, and lots of sanitary towels scattered around. Sparkly high heels in a children's size. In the center of it all, 2 raw pork chops with no packaging just sitting there in the middle of the floor. I can get the beer cans and women's clothing. Presumably an alcoholic with some kind of cross-dressing habit. Not exactly ordinary, but whatever. Far from the weirdest thing I've seen. But why was the window smashed outwards? Why the shoes in a child's size? Why the hell would you smear honey on the inside of the window? Why would you have a raw pork chop in the middle of your van? Never did find out the answers to those questions. It all got passed on to a different team. Not sure I want to know given the guy's history, and I don't even want to say what my guesses would be. It's about a buddy from work, who's not a cop, but a volunteer firefighter. He used to get called to really bad accidents on I-95, a very busy interstate highway. He gets called to this bad accident that involved 4 people, or what was left of them, and a highly intoxicated lady that was driving way too fast. Turns out that the 2 girls in the car were fine, while both their boyfriends were outside the car to change a flat. Whilst doing so, here comes the drunk lady and creams both guys while doing 100. My friend, let's call him Bill, gets there and tries to do chest compressions, which he couldn't really do because the guy was missing the whole right side of his chest. So basically his entire chest caved in. At this point, understandably, the girls were going crazy, saying there was another guy involved, but Bill can't find him until he made his way down to the drunk lady's car. The body was pinned underneath the car and was dragged 50 yards down the road. All that was left was barely identifiable as human. Don't drink and faking drive. People point at it. 1. Call me a fact checker, but I reread this to my buddy over text, and he made some corrections. There were 2 cars that were hit by the drunk lady. The second guy, not the first guy with a missing chest cavity, wasn't under the drunk lady's car, but he was under his own car that was parked in front of the first guy's car. The one with the flat. So that makes the second guy being shoved under the car in the front. I then asked him, wasn't someone decapitated in this story? Because he tells me a lot of messed up stories, which he replied, oh, no. That was another accident. Edit. 2. More corrections. The first guy with the missing chest cavity was sent 25 yards up the highway from the impact being so hard. Preamble. In Canada, police officers take on the role of crime scene examiners. I know that's done by civilians in other countries, so I'm at a suspicious sudden death. It's a typical Canadian November day, about -5 to -10 Celsius and clear. I get a call that there's a dude dead in his living room, and it looks sketchy. I attend and speak to the patrol officer who found the guy. He tells me a neighbor called in a check welding on the old dude, so he shows up and tried knocking/ringing the doorbell. Door was locked and nobody came to answer, so he checked the perimeter, and when he got to the back patio door he could see the old guy collapsed in the living room. He and a backup unit breached the front door, and sure enough, there's a dead guy laying in the middle of the living room, surrounded by blood. Has obvious trauma to his head, consistent with some sort of firearm wound. Then, the patrol officer shows me around to the side of the house. There's a rifle there, leaning against the side of the house, along with blood spatter. It appears consistent with someone having been shot at that location. Suddenly, alarm bells start ringing in my head. Things aren't adding up. I meticulously check the grounds surrounding the house and find no blood trail at all. If someone had killed the old man outside, there should be some blood trail leading from the shooting site into the house when they moved the body, and there is none. There's none in the house either, just a pool by his head. There is absolutely no spatter stain in the residence, so he clearly was shot outside. This was starting to look like murder, not suicide. No normal person could sustain a head wound like that, drag themselves into the house without bleeding, and then die inside. But a murderer sure could drag a body inside without leaving a trace, if they were careful about it. So then, I start getting super all about things. I'm checking grass to see if it's been flattened. Checking shrubs by the side of the house to see if there are any recent breaks to the branches that would indicate a person brushed up against them. Looking for footprints on concrete tiles. Fingerprinting doorknobs, windows, everything. Nothing unusual shows up. I call for a consult. 2 very senior NCOs, 1 a bloodstain analyst, come to look at things and are as baffled as me. They start talking about things quietly, and I'm standing there waiting for some advice. While I'm waiting, I realize I haven't done one of the standard tests we technically are supposed to do even at obvious sudden deaths with bloodstains, indirect hemastics testing. A hemastics is a presumptive test for blood. When you put blood on the yellow test strip, a chemical reaction changes it to a dark green color. So I grab a swab band strip from my kit and take a sample of the blood pulled around his head to test, just so I can check the box that I tested it, and it came back positive as possible blood. But it didn't. The hemastics didn't react. For the second time that day, I experienced a what the fuck moment. It was clearly blood. It was pulled around his head. Or was it? I took another swab, this time directly next to the wound cavity, and tested it. Negative. What the actual fuck was happening? Okay, I thought. The strips must be expired. No biggie. I have a new container in the van. I'll go grab them. I grabbed a brand new bottle and confirmed the expiry date, pulled out a strip, and did the test. Negative. Again. Now, I interrupted the 2 NCOs and pulled them over and demonstrated the test again. They both had stunned looks on their faces. There was no way the blood shouldn't be causing a reaction. I made a phone call to the lab. They were stumped. I called our headquarters in Ottawa and spoke to one of our research scientists, and after getting some advice from them determined what the hell was happening. See, I said before, no normal person could sustain that kind of wound and drag themselves inside afterwards. Turns out old man was not a normal person. He was in very poor health and suicidal due to constant chronic pain and health issues. One of the meds he was on was known to not only have the side effects of causing false negative reactions to blood reagent testing, but to also dramatically lower user blood pressure in colder temperatures. The old man went out with a rifle and shot himself in the head, hoping being outside someone would hear the shot and call 911 so the police would find his body, explaining the stains on the side of the house. But he was a bad shot, and the wound wasn't immediately fatal. Unfortunately, nobody heard the shot. He passed out from the pain, and the combination of the medicine and lower temperature slowed his circulation enough that the wound partially clotted, and with the lower pressure he didn't bleed out right away. When he regained consciousness, he stumbled into the house and locked the door behind him, laying down on the floor. The activity and increased ambient temperature got his circulation going enough again, increased his blood pressure enough, and he bled out on the living room floor. Turned out to be a suicide after all, and we later found evidence locked up that included a recent suicide note in his own handwriting. Not a cop at all, but my grandpa was in the FBI in the 60s 80s and has some interesting stories he's told me. Back in the day there was a wanted man who they had been trying to find for a while. They knew where he lived, but every time they would check to see if he was at his apartment there were never any signs of him. He lived far away from the city in a relatively rural area of Texas. One day my grandpa was off duty and was in the area, I'm not sure why, and decided to check on it, not expecting anything to come of it. The guy wasn't known to be dangerous, so my grandpa didn't think much of going to check on the house. He went up to the door and knocked. The door opened up after a little and lo and behold, it's the guy they're looking for standing right in front of him with a pistol in his hand. I don't remember exactly what happened since I was told this story a while ago, but he managed to disarm the guy and get him cuffed. The guy didn't resist and later claimed that he was practicing his quick draw. After my grandpa got him into handcuffs, he put the pistol on top of the refrigerator in the room, assuming that the wanted guy was the only person in the apartment. My grandpa started taking the guy out of the apartment to his car. As he was reaching the door, he heard a yell from behind him. His girlfriend had been in the apartment the whole time, and when he turned around she had grabbed the gun from the top of the fridge and demanded that he let the guy go. So instead of letting him go, but grandpa used the guy as a human shield and told her to put the gun down. She refused, so he approached her with her boyfriend in between them for protection. He got close enough to throw the boyfriend into her and subsequently cuffed her too. The whole time the wanted guy was pleading with the girlfriend to stop and didn't struggle against my grandpa. My grandpa only took the wanted guy because they were far from the city. I don't remember if he went back for the girlfriend later or if he got back up to do it. So TLDR, my grandpa used a human shield when in the FBI. Standard, not a cop, but I'm actually a security officer for a downtown bus station. The station is home to a lot of homeless people, less fortunate, and plenty of troublemakers. We usually know all of the troublemakers by first name because we deal with them on a regular basis. So anyways, I made a deposit for the bus station and noticed a fella asleep on the bench inside the lobby. Usually this isn't a big deal, but that would mean that I would have to wake him up later when I returned. Unluckily this day, we had a troublemaker hanging around. Now most people think that we deal with common drug dealers and gangbangers at this bus station, which is true. However, we live near a rural area with lots and lots of poor conservatives. So several of our troublemakers are also old angry white dudes and faking sovereign citizens. Fact sovereign citizens. Anyways, I returned from the deposit to see several cop cars pulled up and a guy getting frisked on one of the windows. So I go over to the cops and ask them what was going on. As it turns out, someone called police on the man claiming he was intoxicated or high on drugs. I noticed that the man was the same one who was asleep in my lobby just earlier. So I asked the cops if the guy was intoxicated or high. Turns out he was not. So I asked who made the call. Turns out it was a private citizen who raised some concerns about a guy being inebriated on property. The bus station didn't call him in and didn't even know what happened. Well, turns out the cops told me it was a guy named Robert, our residence officer. Fact. Robert is a Winnie officer who really likes to tattle on people and make up outlandish stories about him getting robbed. If any of you remember Andal from Disney, Recess, this is him in adult form. So I asked the cops if they would be willing to talk to Robert and give him a warning. They said, nope. Fact, I needed to talk to him. I pulled Robert aside and asked him if he called the police on the guy. Robert said he did and he would do it again if needed. So I had to warn Robert that he was not the law at the bus station. He needed to tell me or the dispatchers if there is a problem and not to take measures into his own hands. Robert got pissed. He started to swear at me and walk towards me, saying that I wasn't an authority over him. I finally had enough and pointed at the door. I told him to leave for the day or I would have him trespassed and arrested. He got the message and sulked under a tree across the street until we closed. 5 soft and fact Robert. I used to be a cop, and one day I was dispatched to a home invasion robbery in progress. Once I arrived, I entered the house where several people ranging from senior citizens to young children were zip-tied wrists to ankles. They said in Spanish that the homie owner was in one of the bedrooms and that he got off some shots at the suspects. I went to that bedroom and just inside the door was an adult male laying face down. I rolled him over and he was obviously dead, having been shot 7 times including one in the forehead area. On the other side of the room was the homeowner. He was still alive and had also been shot 7 times, but none were fatal. He was still clutching his empty pistol. He kept saying, "I got those motherfuckers." Apparently what had happened was that the whole family was in the living room when 4 suspects kicked in the front door. The homie owner said he ran to his room to get his pistol, to defend himself as they were coming in. He said he had to load it, so while they zip-tied the family he hid in the room. After a few minutes passed, the dead suspect and the others started searching rooms. He said when they got to his he stood up and they opened fire on each other. The homie Arwana said 4 people shot at him and he didn't know how many he hit. He said he didn't know he got hit at first, but when he tried to chase the suspects as they ran out he collapsed. He was hit in both legs, the abdomen and left arm. The guy was such a badass, and he survived the incident. He had actually hit all 4 suspects. One died and the others showed up at 2 different hospitals about an hour later. The idiots didn't wear masks, so the family was able to identify them. They got life in prison. I personally think they were going to kill everyone, and that is why they didn't wear masks. They targeted that specific house because it was harvest season and they had hundreds of pounds of processed marijuana in different stages of packaging on the property. Some was hanging to dry in a barn. Some was in a big pile broken up in a bedroom and the rest was packaged in shipping boxes ready to be moved. When this happened, recreational marijuana was not legal yet. The homie Arwana grew it for a medical dispensary, but was way over what he was allowed to grow. My dad is a cop, so I have 2 stories he has said. These aren't the most faked up, but it's the 2 he wouldn't mind being shared with others. First story, he shows up to a rollover on the highway. It is a U-Haul that flipped onto its side. A different vehicle rolled. He knows there are fatalities before he even gets there. He said as he walks around the front of the upturned truck he sees the feet first and it already had him unsettled. First dead body, it was his 2nd week. As he keeps walking it becomes clear that the truck's side landed just below the guy's jaw, so it completely crushed his head with the cargo area. Later that day, he gets a call of a garbage truck that backed up over a homeless man. He didn't go into detail with this one other than, warning, stepping on a ketchup packet. He went into more detail, but that's all I actually remember and don't want to put details that aren't there. Second story, about 2 months later, he gets a call about a truck driver that has had an accident. He gets on the scene. Everything is fine except for a basketball-sized hole in the back door of the truck. When they open the doors there is a motorcycle helmet in the back. The head was still in there. At the same time a different local police department calls asking if they have had any odd motorcycle accidents. They had the other body in the back about 50 miles away. Turned out the trucker's lights were out and the motorcycle was going over 150 to hit that hard. Not me, but my so gets a call to a domestic disturbance, and when he gets there he hears noises and yelling and sees that the door is open and there's a screen door in place. He walks up and bangs on the screen door and announces he's the police. After a little more noise a disheveled man walks up inside the house carrying a gun. So, I need you to hand that gun to me, sir. Man, oh, sure. I'm glad you got here, officer. I was just about to use this on my wife. So, what the fuck? Can I talk to your wife, man? She ran off when she heard you coming. So, sure she did. I need to have a look through your house. Man, okay, come on in. But I'm telling you she ran off. She was beating me real bad this time. So, takes a quick look through the very small house. No wife. Man, look. You can still see her running. So goes to back window. In the distance can see a woman running like hell away from the house through the field. So, do you want to file a complaint? Man, nah, we do this all the time. Can I have my gun back? So, hands gun back and leaves wondering how he's going to write this up. Cop here. Let me tell you about El Duende. It's a Hispanic term for something like a gnome, and it is the nickname for this short guy who resides in my district. One night we get a report of a robbery/stabbing and meet with the victim's friends alongside a large pool of blood. They said El Duende got stabbed and ran away. They don't know El Duende's real name. There is a trail of blood drops that lead all the way around an apartment complex, and we follow it. We get to the other side, right across the street from a convenience store, and find a larger pool of blood. It's everywhere to the point where it looked like someone slaughtered a cow, like it was sprayed. At this point we are less concerned about the robbers and more concerned about finding El Duende, because he might die from blood loss if we didn't find him. The hospitals tell us he hasn't come in yet. We continue to follow the blood trail. It leads us to a different neighborhood a little less than a mile away. We even find another pool of blood similar to the first one along the way. It starts to rain, and the blood trail starts disappearing. About an hour and a half has gone by. At one point our helicopter was helping, but it had to land due to weather. The K9 is helping us. Then a call comes out for a suspicious event near where the blood ended. Someone had written something on someone's house. We walk over and see a townhouse with the words Duende written in blood, in large letters, on 3 sides of the house. It turned out to be Duende's parents' house. After we describe Duende to them, it took a while for them to realize this. There was a lot of what the hell is going on here. They told us their 30-year-old son has mental problems and stays in the park near their house. We check the park and find a guy covered in blood. His cloths are completely soaked in blood. I ask if he's Duende. He says no. I tell him I think he's not telling the truth and he says okay, I'm Duende. He refused to go to the hospital, so my buddy paid him $1 to go, and he did. It turns out his friends lied. There was no robbery. Duende cut himself because he thought it was funny. I spent the next hour wondering what the fuck just happened. TLDR, Duende, lots of blood, police, Duende written in blood on house, paid him $1 to go to the hospital. Oh yeah, forgot to mention. He didn't cut himself with a knife. He cut into his arms with fingernail clippers. His is the only unsolved mystery I've handled that has continued to bother me. The prior shift had been receiving tons of 911 hang-up calls that's being pinged to a general area with an open line on callback. The calls continued into our shift. Every so often, we canvassed the area of the call, knocked on a few doors, checked cell phones, nothing. I started calling the number back on my personal phone, and it would answer to an open line. I started hearing general outdoor noises that I was hearing real time. Cars, birds. I started hitting my siren and was hearing my own siren through the call. Long story short, we managed to pinpoint the area of the call by making noises to this new pickup truck parked in a driveway. First we are thinking maybe a Bluetooth or OnStar type error was making the calls. We checked, nothing. We actually start banging on the truck and we can tell that the noise is being picked up from the rear tailgate area of this truck. We looked all around this vehicle and found nothing. We kept calling and the device kept answering and we could literally hear our own voices through the call. By standing at the rear of this vehicle, we could not ourselves from the interior of the truck, so it wasn't a device on the inside of the cab. Eventually we had to give up and move on with our lives. The device stopped making 911 calls and eventually stopped answering calls. The lady just bought the truck a week ago, neatly brand new with only a few thousand miles. I had a crazy theory that someone was tracking either the previous or the current owner with some kind of phone GPS device that they hid in the body of the truck. That's literally the only thing I could think of that would create this scenario. Slightly different. Dad was a police officer for several years and I've heard some graphic stories consistently point a week into his first shift and he had to go to a collision report. A motorcyclist was hauling us and came flying around a corner and there was a parked semi. He hit the back of the truck so hard the green dye from his leather jacket burst all over the back of the truck. My dad said it looks like someone just dumped paint all over the scene and blood streaks through it. He still doesn't know how this happened. He responded to a call about an elderly lady taking their life. Extremely common. My dad faking, flew there at Mac Jesus, and reported on the scene. He booked it into the bedroom, and booted the door down, to find her laying down beside her bed. He raised the back of her neck to start doing CPR, so the airway was clear. As he did, a very thick black liquid starting gushing out. He had no faking idea what it could have been. Still doesn't to this day. Said about half a liter came out. Point is probably his most graphic scene, and one that probably still is the main route for his PTSD. For backstory, I have 3 siblings. My dad got a call for a head-on collision about 15 minutes away from his station. Naturally he coded there. Upon arrival everyone on the street, including first responders, were pale white. No one was moving, except the firefighters who were basically clearing up. My dad had to do the investigation and once he's starting heading for one of the cars he notices from the side mirror that all the seat belts haven't been placed in the clip. He glanced up and saw how far the street was cut off to public, and it stretched about 500 meters. He went to one of the cars and there was 3 bodies on the inside. Not a single head on any of them. He noticed that there was 4 pairs of shoes inside the car however. He walked around the scene for 15 minutes and found a girl roughly my sister's age, 16 at the time, under a SUV without a head. He spent 30 minutes walking around this street looking for 4 heads belonging to the ages of all of his kids. His head was basically spinning, and his body took over and finished the rest of the job. I remember the night he came home and called all of us into the living room. Not a word was said. Just a look of shock and him glaring at us for 2 hours. Looking at every single detail about us. As he was refraining from crying. I did ask him about posting this, and he was comfortable. He now does talk about him fighting his inner demons and struggling with PTSD. Love you dad. You are the best man I have and ever will meet. Glad you finally retired. Former US Coast Guard. Had a week from hell with boaters down in the Carolinas. Due to shoal waters and shifting sand, the Intercoastal Waterway, ICW, in our region required buoys to be shifted almost monthly to mark best water/channels for ships. A large 700 feet cargo ship had not updated its nautical charts for the autopilot and steamed down the ICW. Over several hundred miles it managed to run over or displace over 320 buoys/dayboards/lights and one entire rear range, 75 feet tall structure/platform with a large light. Because the channels were poorly marked due to inaccurate/missing aids to navigation, we had to respond to maybe 100 plus harder ground calls from boaters that week until the construction/buoy cutters were able to get everything back in place. I'm talking everything from sailboats, jet skis, fishing trawlers, and even an entire ferry halfway up the beach. The ferry slammed into the sandbar at 25 plus knots with a passenger load of hundreds of senior citizens, so we arrived on scene and had to medevac via helicopter and boats to waiting ambulances for the better part of 4 hours. We ran 16, 20-hour boat crew shifts every single day for 9 days. At least we got our required towing evolution hours in for that quarter, and then some. Shipping company was found at fault and the US government sent them a bill in the 8-figure range. It takes $10,000 just to get some of the larger cutters underway and $30,000 just to get some of the hellas from Elizabeth City Air Station up in the air. A total shit show. I'm not a cop, but I'm a med student and used to volunteer for the ambulance. I'm sorry but English is not my mother language. Also this is very graphic. We got called to an emergency in a nearby village. We go there and find a family. Father is holding his 9-year-old girl in his arms. Her head was very bloody, but there was also something else wrong. Her head looked unnatural. It was very wide. It looked like it was pressed. Anyway, our doctor, I was on our intensive care ambulance that had an doctor also, took her and put her down. And when he tried to check her out, I've seen how her skull moved where he passed. I thought I was going crazy for a second. Can't believe what I see. But when he finally let her head go, his finger literally left a dent in her skull. I personally couldn't handle it anymore. I feeling lightheaded, almost like passing out, and went back to hide in the ambulance. Our unit sat there for 40 minutes doing CPR, while police came also. When the guys finally came back, they all looked like they've seen a ghost. I apologized for leaving and asked if I'm crazy or if I'm imagining that her head was like a gelatine. The doctor told me yes, her head was a gelatine. While I checked for her vitals, I could feel the bone frags moving under my fingers. He explained me what happened. Wait a little longer, and I asked him why. Did they even do CPR? If that was the case, she was long gone before we even got there. And his answer was, look, no one is going to forget this day ever. We see a lot of shit, but this one beats the most by a long margin. You are right. She was dour. Today we couldn't save anyone, but at least we could comfort her family. Those people didn't need to know that their girl was dead, and we couldn't do anything about it. They needed to know that we did everything we could to try and save her. They will probably be haunted forever by what happened today, but at least they might have some peace seeing us trying to save her. At the end of the day, we can at least save the people who are still alive. As for what happened, in this village there was a tradition that people would go on a top of a hill At night, every summer and throw/roll stuff objects from the top of the hill. Some kind of tradition for good luck from a long time ago. They were throwing away their bad luck. Anyway, looks like it was the day before this would happen, and in the middle of the day, a group of kids, 10 to 15, rolled a tier up the hill to play like the event, and they rolled it off the hill. At the bottom of this certain hill was this family's house. When the tier hit the bottom of the hill, it was so fast that it jumped over the fence inside their garden where the poor girl was playing alone, and the tire hit her straight in the head, killing her on the spot. Was a deputy assigned the jail. I'm working picture and print when I walk by one of our holding tanks and see a lower 20s black male naked in the holding tank doing what I can only assume is his version of an African tribal dance. The other inmates in the holding tank see me and start yelling to get them the heck out of there. I call 2 other deputies and an officer down there and have them open that tank and the one next to it. The other inmates couldn't get out of there fast enough. Once the other inmates were secure, the 2 other deputies and I tried to talk to the guy, but he charged us. All 3 of us spray him with OK. He just stopped and stared at us. OK ain't no sheet. It's supposed to temporarily blind you, makes it hard to breathe, and stings where it touches. This guy then starts to masturbate using the OK as lube. The 2 other deputies then take a step to subdue him, but I holler for the holding tank door to be immediately shut. They protested, saying there's just one of him, and he's a skinny kid. I pointed at him and told them that skinny kid is faking jacking off with OK. He ain't feeling no pain. We need more guys. We stacked up 8 guys, and even then it still took us a good 5 to 10 minutes of fighting and finally just dogpiling this kid to get control. Of course most of us were coughing and hurting afterward, but I learned the local junior college PD was the ones that brought him in and were still in the building filling their reports. I found them and told them I knew they never had more than 3 guys on shift at any time, and it just took all 8 of us to get control of that kid. How'd they do it? The sergeant looked at me with a sheet-eating grin and said I pinned him down with my car. Turns out the kid was on wet. Apparently it's marijuana dipped in embalming fluid. Got his ass run over by a cruiser, sprayed with OK, and then was for a short time holding his own against 8 men, and he probably only weighed 98 pounds soaking wet. Craziest fight I ever had. I showed up to a noise complaint at a house that has been historically rented by frat boys at a local small university. When I arrived at the house, the windows were boarded up, which I thought was really strange. But I could hear noise inside, like there was a loud party. I got out of my car, and halfway up the walkway to the house, the noise just stopped. It was like someone pressed mute on the entire world. It was jarring. I continued my approach to the front door and knocked. Nothing. There was a very strong odor, one that I actually could not identify. It had a chemical quality, but kind of sweet. I had no idea what to make of it, but given how strong the odor was, I decided to try the handle, and the door was unlocked, and I opened it slowly. I shit you not, the house appeared empty, but everything was covered in some sort of foam. I mean, everything. Every inch of every surface, furniture, walls, looked like bubble bath. The smell was starting to sicken me. I couldn't see or hear any person or movement anywhere. I decided to go back out onto the front lawn and see what I could ascertain from the exterior. As I made my way back to my patrol car, a line of people, also covered in this foam, began running out a side door and out towards the neighboring property. One by one, just a line of sprinting, foamy people. What the fuck happened here? I'm video operator at a mega church and it's 2004. There's a special meeting for all these Bible study leaders on a weeknight, and I get my packet for the event, which is a burned DVD with a sticky note on it that says play session 3 on it. I drive across town, turn on all the gear, drop the DVD into the DVD player, hit session 3, and it plays fine. My supervisor drops in. He wanted to see what these meetings are all about. We chat it up. An hour later the event starts, and the head pastor's wife takes the stage to host the event and sets up what we are going to be watching. Lights go out, and, wouldn't you know it, session 3 plays like a charm. About 5 minutes pass. The head pastor's wife skulks into my booth. What do you think you are doing? I look around. My boss is sitting off to the side and I'm stumped. Explain that I'm playing the DVD and want to know if I missed an agenda point for the evening. We are supposed to be doing session 3 tonight. This is not session 3, and I want to know how you plan to make up the time for these 200 people who showed up, whose time you are wasting. I'm seriously confused. I look around, and my boss has just scurried out the door to the booth, to freedom. I apologize. Looking around, this is so very out of left field that I don't know what to say or how to reply. Your apologies aren't good enough. Your word aren't good enough. The job you think you are doing here, it is not good enough. I don't know who you think you are, that you can come into my church and just do whatever you want, play whatever you want, and ruin my meetings, but I will not stand for this. This goes into a multi-minute diatribe about how her husband and she made this church what it is, and I'm an employee and a hireling, and I had better rethink my life. Turns out, this multi-million-dollar a year organization bought one copy of these DVDs, ripped them, and then made copies for all the pastors. The ones I got had the video tracks mislabeled and misplaced, so my menu said lesson 3, but it was some other lesson from this series. I don't think I can stress how unexpected, out of the blue, and confusing that whole situation was. I was a military police officer a few years back in North Carolina. We had gotten dispatched to a disorderly conduct call between an employee and a female patron at the PX, the base department store, for the Sted. At the time these were fairly common calls, since military wives have a tendency to stir up shit with other women, especially on base point. We pull up to the back of the building near the manager's entrance where the two subjects were reported to be at. We're expecting to see two people arguing/fighting, but instead we see a very baffled looking store worker standing outside, and a very long trail of women's clothing leading from the sidewalk all the way into the wood line behind the building. We speak with the employee, who tells us that some lady had come to the customer service desk demanding to speak with the manager, and after being told to wait for a few minutes, went out behind the store to the employee parking lot, starting screaming at some random employees in the smoking area, and started walking over into the woods while, you guessed it, taking off all of her clothes. We end up getting a few more MPs on scene, including our female sergeant, thank God, to start canvassing the wood line for this lady. We also went ahead and got M's there as well, since we know we are probably looking for an EDP, emotionally disturbed person. After about 5 minutes or so of walking through the woods, our sergeant ends up finding the lady sighting buck ass naked on a tree branch singing Barbie Girl, acting like she doesn't have a care in the world. We ended up talking her down from the tree and getting her into the ambulance to tack with the paramedics. We also contacted her husband and were able to get him there as well a few minutes later. The husband tells us that she has a long history of mental illness, surprise, surprise, and that he was trying to convince her to see a therapist. They ended up taking her to the mental health ward at the Naval Hospital to get treated. Never heard any more about it afterwards, but I hope she got the help that she needed. Not a cop, but was still in a school and interning on a psychiatric ward. Cops bring in this guy who is high as a kite. Tiny little guy. I was taller than he was. Cops warn us he's a bit angry and suggest that we get a number of staff to assist in the assessment process in case he became violent. I was thinking they were a couple of idiots for being afraid of this little guy and thinking this guy couldn't hurt a fly, but I humored them and got 4 staff to come in the assessment room. We begin the assessment, and while the guy was angry, he wasn't violent or anything. He was just high. I figured we'd let him sleep it off and then reassess him in the morning when he could think straight. He assumed, however, that he was going to be allowed to leave. He was not happy that we were keeping him. We got up to escort him to his room, explaining that we were going to need to keep him, when he escalated and ran over to the locked doors to the unit. I don't know how much these doors weighed, but I had to use all my body weight to pull one open. They were huge double metal doors that had an equally huge lock in the middle between them. A bunch of us stood there while he banged on them as I was psyching myself up to move in with what I thought was my fantastic verbal de-escalation skills. Dude became enraged and started slamming his hands and feet against the locked doors. Before I could say a word, right in front of all of us, he managed to get his fingers in the crack of the door and we watched him literally rip the right door off its hinge like the faking Hulk. He tossed it aside like it weighed nothing and walked out the door into the lobby and then through the parking lot, kicking the lobby door and shattering the glass in the process. Myself, 4 floor tech staff, a psychiatrist, a couple of patients, and about 7 nurses stood dumbfounded and watched him walk away. Not a single damn one of us tried to stop him. The cops were probably still out in their car in the parking lot, and we didn't even call them. Nope. I seriously watched the news for a week every time it was on to try to see if this guy was out in the city causing havoc, but never saw him again. TLDR at the bottom point, not a cop, but a what the fuck experience with a cop point. So me and my ex-boyfriend back then were driving home from the cinema. It was summer, so I was wearing a top, shorts and a blouse for when it got colder in evening point. We were driving and hit some traffic lights. In this town we knew that traffic lights changed fast, but this went from green to orange to red within a few seconds. My ex was going pretty fast. We had someone behind us also going fast. He decided to take the change and go through orange, which changed to red. So technically we drove through red point. Of course there was police watching this and stopped us. He walked up to our car, asked for the usual paperwork and walked back. His college came to his window and started to ask some questions. Where you calling? Where did you came from? Did you have a drink? All answer, and then he looked at me. I had my blouse on my legs, cause I was cold cause I only had shorts on. He asked my ex if we were doing something else. We answer no, just talking. Are you sure? Cause she isn't wearing any pants. I quickly removed my blouse from my legs, showing my shorts, and repeatedly said I was wearing shorts and we were not doing anything. Cop got embarrassed and quickly left. Other cop came back, apologized, gave back our paperwork, and said we got off with a warning. Sounds less awkward like this, but my face turned into a faking tomato. Pretty sure his too. TLTR, cop thought we were having some sort of sex in the car, cause you couldn't see my shorts, and that's why we drove through red. Obligatory, not a cop, but in 2011 my roommates and I decided to have a Super Bowl party at our house. There was an intern there from our company who came with a boyfriend we worked with. They got in a fight and she proceeded to get super faked up. We were pretty sure it wasn't just alcohol, but we couldn't prove it. So it's the end of the night and everyone is leaving, but she will just not leave. She wasn't safe to drive, but that didn't matter because she couldn't find her car. So we get her back inside and we have a house meeting to try to figure out what to do. We are upstairs in my room when we hear a crash downstairs. One roommate is elected to go investigate. He finds her in the kitchen with a shattered jar of pasta sauce. When he comes down she looks straight at him and says, "I don't know who did it, but I'll clean it up." She was the only one downstairs. So we decide to call the cops, and while we are waiting she deep cleans our kitchen. The cops finally show up, and one by one we come out to talk to them. It was a 4-bedroom house with 6 roommates, so as we are coming out the cops say it's like a frat house with how many people we had living there. Really, our company just paid us like shit, so we needed to save on rent. The cops end up talking to her, and she starts yelling about us calling the cops. They end up kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying they aren't a taxi service, and since we invited her they can't do anything about it. They leave and we end up getting her to calm down and put her on the couch to sleep it off. She ends up trying to climb into bed with the roommate with the downstairs bedroom. She gets put back on the couch and passes out. When we woke up in the morning she was gone. I guess she found her car. It's a guess, but that was probably a big what the fuck moment for those cops. Very late to the party and on mobile, so I apologize in advance. Brother-in-law is a special constable in the police here in the UK, volunteer position, and he told me this story that happened a couple months ago. He is cruising around with his partner for the night when they get a call to a notorious country road around midnight. This spot is an accident hotspot due to the undulating road, which features a steep decline and then incline like a dip in the road. From certain angles you cannot see the dip at all until you go over the top. Anyway, they arrive on scene to the RTC, which was called in as involving a horsebox. What he explains before him can only be described as a horror show. 2 vehicles are involved. a 4x4 pulling a empty horsebox and a people carrier behind. The people carrier has now been turned into a convertible by the door of the horsebox flying off as it went down the steep hill. The wind must have got under the door, lifting it from the ground, at which point the people carrier has drove straight through it, taking off the roof and the head of the sole occupant inside, which was unfortunately displayed on the parcel shelf, boot shelf, looking out of the back window. The torso of the mantel seat bolted in place. My brother-in-law was given counseling and compensation due to the severity of the incident. Get a call to one of those pay-by-the-hour hotels, so right away we thought it was kicking out a crackhead or something drug-related. Boy, how far off we were. Manager tells us the guy inside paid for 2 hours, and after that time had expired they went to the room to see what was up. Manager said he knocked a bunch of times and the door was locked, and oddly enough he doesn't have a spare key, if that gives you an idea as to how seedy this place is. So we call who we need, and we gain entry to the room, and what was presented in front of us will forever be burned in my brain. The room is set up like any shady hotel from any movie you've seen, except on one wall there is a large glass mirror that goes down to almost where the floor meets the wall. There is an older man, completely naked, face down as if he were just on his hands and knees, backed up very close to the mirror. An open laptop in front of him, gay born slamming away on the screen, and attached to the mirror is I don't know, a 12-inch black dildo. He is also dead, and right away we think impalement. For obvious reasons, further investigation showed that he actually died from suffocation. A cloth next to him had a substance on it that he was huffing while rearranging his organs. But the most ironic part of all is the name of the substance on the cloth. Turns out it's a steel solvent called Maximum Impact. Apparently very big in the gay community based off some pretty dark research and an unsettling forum. I can only imagine the tools needed to pull that thing from his cold clenched rectum. Well, wouldn't those other kids be vaccinated? So they will be fine basically. The parents that would freak out about unvaccinated children would be covered. I mean, I really hope it doesn't become mandatory, because something about forcibly injecting people just seems freaking dystopian. You disregarded my comments about New Ageism and metaphysics, but it's something you should look into. It's a difficult concept to understand at first, but it's basically saying that cancer, for example, is ultimately caused by harmful thought process, leading to harmful eating and other habits, which actually causes the cancer. People don't want to face this truth, because it means taking responsibility for seemingly random illness, and yes, it's certainly extremely traumatizing to infants, and I think people forget this, because they've already bought so much into the system, and received so many shots. I think like half of Americans are suffering, probably more unreported, from mental illness, whether it be or bipolar or depression, or whatever. This is pretty staggering, and yet it has been normalized. You gotta understand that some science like psychology isn't objectively measured or easily observed, and guess what? Psychological problems are also contagious. Depressed people make those around them depressed. I'm personally subscribing to a more psychological, metaphysical approach to the problem, and I hope that is respected. I know it's not though, because it's an abstract thought and Americans are more right-brained and of the herd mentality. If I sometime decide to have kids, and you'll have made it a criminal offense to evade vaccination, then I will surely move to a more open-minded place, without overreaching laws.